My name is Chelsea. I'm the owner of My Mommy Wisdom, and today I have my two great friends, Taquay and Kendra, joining me on this call as we discuss Black Maternal Health Week. So, Black Maternal Health Week is basically a movement that African American women have begun to advocate on behalf of those women who are giving birth or going through the pregnancy process and are not being afforded the same health benefits and care as our other counterparts. I especially feel important to discuss this now just because we're going through some unprecedented times, and I know that there are a lot of moms that are uneasy about giving birth and just the delivery process. We wanted to share all of our stories because I feel personally like a lot of women can relate to it, and we don't really talk about the scariness of actual delivery. You know, it is a beautiful process, but not every mom is afforded that wonderful, glorious delivery experience. And I want us to start to kind of peel back those layers and talk about it. You know, we have some friends that are afraid to even have a second child just because of the trauma that they experienced with their first delivery. I have my friends on here, so we're all going to share our stories, and feel free to leave questions in the comments if you can relate.
I am Taquay Bogle. I am a mother of one amazing son, Robert Antonio Bogle V. And I became pregnant with little Robert, I would say maybe my 27th birthday. I went in for my annual and the doctor told me the week before, she was like, so you're 27, you haven't had any scares or anything. You might have some issues conceiving. You know, I see you have fibroids. I don't know if you're going to be able to conceive. And it kind of sort of caught me off guard because I had never thought about, you know, am I going to be able to have kids at the time my boyfriend. And the next month I go into the OBGYN for a follow-up on fibroids and I am pregnant. So I would say maybe a few weeks into my first trimester, I became very stressed from personal situation and almost miscarried my son. I remember being at work and all of a sudden just feeling like this gush. I went to the ER and the doctor told me, you know, you may be miscarrying. You'll come back tomorrow. We'll check your levels and see whether or not your hormones are still there. I came back the next day and I was able to actually see his heartbeat. He was doing really, really well. But when I went into my OBGYN to follow up the day after that, she was like, well, if you miscarry, you miscarry. It is what it is. People do that. And I was just caught off guard by that because there was a certain level of just like, for me, like being inhumane about the situation. I immediately started searching for a new OBGYN. We relocated to Tallahassee and I found an OBGYN who was willing to take me in my third trimester. So around the third trimester is when I started really doing a lot of research on what a birth plan should look like. We did like a 3-month parenting class. So I was really prepared. I spent days and days and days doing, you remember Chelsea, because she stayed behind me. So I showed her this like glamorous birth plan. It was 4 pages. I made his dad memorize the whole thing. I made copies for everyone. And I started having premature labor after a hurricane hit and went in 2 more times for, you know, Braxton Hicks. And they were like, I don't know if you're going to make it to your due date. And then my son just started to get really big. I remember rolling over one night and I threw out my back. And my OBGYN was like, okay, he's kind of large for your frame. We're going to go ahead and induce you on my 40th week, September the 14th and September the 12th. And they put something to like tenderize my cervix and started to, you know, soften so that it could expand. And I just remember feeling this intense pain. I did not read about C-sections. I had like this birth list and told myself it was going to be so magical. The pain hit and I asked, could I go home? I wanted to start again. They came in to do the epidural and it was only working on one side. I labored for a total of 33 hours. At which time the OBGYN said, okay, you know, you're catching a fever, your son's starting to be a little unresponsive, and I had to go in for an emergency C-section. I was extremely horrified by the whole ordeal, but Robert got here, 9 pounds, 2.5 ounces safe, and then all hell broke loose once we got over to the other side. Chelsea came to see me maybe like a day in, and I started to become really engorged. And I remember her telling me, you know, your nurse is supposed to be in here on top of this, making sure that, you know, you don't have this type of, you know, pain. So she helped me get some of the lumps out and get the breast milk flowing. Robert was jaundiced, so I had to continuously nurse him. Maybe like a day and a half in of being in recovery, I started to be really, really cold, but my temperature was extremely hot. One of my nurses forgot to give me the antibiotics that I'm assuming you're supposed to take after your C-section, and my OBGYN came to check on me and realized something was really wrong. I ended up spending about maybe 5 or 6 days post C-section in the hospital after I developed this really bad infection. And once home, everything seemed to pick up. I didn't have any issues nursing or anything like that, but just the whole ordeal of everything I planned, everything I mapped out, it went to crap.
I want to say too, I remember being in the hospital with you and I was getting frustrated because the nurse hadn't made her rounds back to give you your medicine. And I remember I kept going out to the charge station and I was like, where is the nurse? Where is the nurse? And I know it doesn't sound like I'm telling the truth, but I'm being 100% honest. There was one nurse that was responsible for that entire floor. One nurse, and she was really overwhelmed. She was like, well, I'll get to her when I get to her. And I was like, well, she's running a fever and you know, she just gave birth. That's not a good sign. Me having like parents in the medical background, there's certain things that like I know to look for. And so I was trying to like tell her that, and she was just like, well, I just can't at this moment. I just can't get to her right now. I have a whole bunch of other patients. And I just felt like, so what's going to happen to my friend? You know, like, why do people have to be reactive instead of proactive? Yes, we're sharing this issue with you. We're telling you that her fever was, you know, too high. She's having these chills. And it wasn't until 2 days later when your OBGYN came and he had to advocate for you. And
the nurse got handed her business by Chelsea. And then when the OBGYN got there, things started happening. But like Chelsea said, why does it have to be me literally on my deathbed for you to care to do anything about me? And that's not the case for, like we were speaking about, you know, Black and brown women. A lot of the time there's this super woman complex when a lot of caregivers are looking at us because, you know, even with the pain, with my epidural not working on one side, I think it was the assumption that, oh, you just want to be more comfortable than what you are. It wasn't until they were about to cut me open that they realized, no, it really hasn't been working on both sides. And then I was faced with the option of either we're going to get this epidural working and, you know, once that goes in, they rarely mess with it, or we're going to knock you out. And who wants to not hear their child come into this world or see their child immediately after coming into this world?
I'm Kendra Ferguson. I have a 6-month-old son who was born in October. His name is Eli James. He's my precious. I can't wait for you all to see him. I just love him so much. Our story is a bit interesting. Me and my husband got married in 2017, and we had plans on getting pregnant toward the end of 2017. Needless to say, it took us a bit longer to get pregnant than we expected. You know, usually when folks look to get pregnant, they think it's a quick and easy process, and it's really not. Especially for a lot of folks who are intentionally trying to get pregnant, it can get stressful, and it was a lot. It was a long process that I wasn't expecting. But we ended up getting pregnant in September of 2018. And we were super excited, like overjoyed, thinking this is the best thing ever. We're going to be parents. And we went in for our first ultrasound, realized the baby didn't have a heartbeat. We had a miscarriage. Worst thing we ever went through as a couple. There were some dark days. There were some days where we were unsure if we would ever get pregnant. I was just in one of the darkest places I've ever been in my life. One, because I wasn't expecting to have a miscarriage. I knew that I was going to be that person that would never get a miscarriage. I never even thought of having a miscarriage until it happened. So we ended up having to have, I believe it's a D&C or a D&E, where they had to go in and remove the baby. And that was that. So we had some follow-up appointments. there was some blood work that showed that I had high levels of prolactin. The prolactin levels continued to increase. So she became concerned. She sent me to an endocrinologist where they found that I have a tumor in my brain, which is called a microadenoma. I believe that's what it's called. But essentially, this tumor sits on my pituitary gland and it triggers my body to produce breast milk. So my body was still thinking that it was pregnant and it wasn't, which made it hard for us to get pregnant again. Um, so at that point, things just got darker. I'm like, you know what? Maybe it's not meant for us to become parents. And God turned things around quickly. When I didn't think that we could get pregnant again, we did. We got pregnant in March of 2019. And my pregnancy was pretty cool. It was completely unexpected. I was celebrating my rainbow child. I'm like, this is my baby. I will say, my first trimester, I was on edge because we had just had that miscarriage. I experienced a lot of spotting, and I'm like, I just really pray that I do not have another miscarriage, because my last miscarriage, I didn't have any symptoms or signs. It was a complete surprise. So the spotting really scared me. But we were able to get through the first trimester, second trimester, early third trimester. I experienced a lot of swelling, my ankles, my legs, my face. It went on for some time. And one day I was at home and I was talking to my husband. I said, Eli is not moving as much as he usually does. And he was like, well, what do you mean by that? I'm like, well, usually he's really active around certain times of the day, and he hasn't been that active today. So we called my cousin. She's actually a nurse in Jacksonville. And she's like, I think you need to go to the hospital. So my husband took me to the hospital. We were hooked up to a stress test, a blood pressure machine. They were tracking my blood pressure, tracking the baby the entire. So they came back in. They said they took some blood, and they found that I had protein in my urine, which really caused the concern. So I'm like, I don't know what y'all are talking about. Y'all gotta let me know, like, what does this mean? So they said with the blood pressure being elevated for as long as it was, and the protein in my urine, it looked like I had preeclampsia. So I never heard of preeclampsia, and I'm like, okay, what does that mean? They said, well, your blood pressure is really high. That's a sign of preeclampsia. The swelling is a sign of preeclampsia. And essentially, if your levels continue to rise, you can have a stroke. So I'm like, wait a minute, let's talk about this further. So they said we usually don't release women who are diagnosed with preeclampsia. And I'm like, what do you mean you don't release women? So they said, you have to stay here until your baby's due. And I'm like, well, my son's not due until December, and it's October. So there's no way I'm staying in the hospital for 2 months. And they're like, usually women who have preeclampsia, they don't carry past 37 weeks. And I was at 30 weeks at that point. So in my mind, I'm like, I have to stay in the hospital for 7 weeks. Like, there's no way. I have a job on campus. I'm a graduate student. I teach 2 classes. I have to be on campus. Like, I can't sit in this hospital. So I got admitted to the hospital that night. A day passed, and they came back in. Mind you, they took my blood work every day to just kind of track my blood pressure, track the protein, and the results came back that day and said, you have now advanced to severe preeclampsia, and you will not be able to deliver or carry your baby past 34 weeks. So in my mind, I'm like, we went from carrying him full term to can't carry him past 37 weeks. So now I can't carry him past 34 weeks. So all of this happened within a day. So my mind was spinning. Needless to say, I carried Eli until 33 weeks and 4 days. I was in the hospital for about a month. There was a lot of back and forth with the doctors. I had high-risk doctors. I had my OBGYN. There were actually 3 high-risk doctors that I was working with. One of them wanted to take the baby right then. Some wanted to wait and say, let's wait this out. Like, we want the baby to stay in as long as they possibly can. So it's good to have doctors who will advocate for you. There were some doctors, like I said, that were ready to just get him out, get me out, and move on to the next person. And there were some doctors that were like, no, we're going to sit here. We're going to monitor her like we said we would. We're going to let that baby stay in as long as it can, as long as it's not giving or putting any risk towards her or the baby. So I delivered Eli on October 26th. I was discharged from the hospital October 29th, and he stayed in the NICU for 2 weeks and 1 day. So he was discharged November 10th. So he is alive and well. I'm doing well. But I will say that that experience, along with the miscarriage that I had in 2018, has really put this fear in my head of getting pregnant again. I do want more children. I just don't know if I want to carry those children.
For me, when I had Arian, I had a perfect pregnancy the entire 9 months. It wasn't until I delivered him that I experienced some issues. I think when I went into labor, I actually labored for 25 hours. Oh, I was like 1 or 2 centimeters dilated when I actually went into the hospital. I think I had gotten my epidural at like 5 centimeters. And then that was like, maybe I was like 6 hours into labor. And then that's when everything kind of paused, and it took like 3 hours for me to get to every centimeter after that. So the epidural, I remember my water broke, and then we didn't deliver him until 7 hours after my water broke. So that wasn't how I thought labor was supposed to go. I thought you break your water, you go to the hospital, you deliver the baby. And that 7 hour mark, at that time, my mom, who is a retired pediatric nurse, my dad is a retired OBGYN, they're in Miami. And so I'm calling them, and my boyfriend at the time, he's calling them, and he's like, well, the doctor said that she's still not fully dilated, we have to wait. And they're like, that's not, no, like, why are they taking so long? Because my son ended up being a meconium baby, and we ended up delivering Arian. He did not take his first breath for like, I want to say it was like 1 minute and 14 seconds. And that was like the scariest moment of my life, because no one was saying anything. And they were like, we don't want him to cry when he's born, because that means that he's gonna like ingest all of this meconium. And I just was like, well, why did you take so long to bring him out? If if these were gonna be the issues, we exposed him to more having him sit in my womb, or my womb with no sac around him for 7 hours. He did end up having to go to the NICU. And I want to say he stayed in there for like 3 or 4 days. They ran all these tests. And I would say that my issue was not only with me, but when I would go to the NICU, it's a very scary process. You can walk into the NICU and you can see a baby one day, and that baby may not be there the next day. So having all of these things kind of like mentally in your mind as you see in your child, it just puts you in a very, it is traumatizing, like it puts you in a mindset of, just no mother wants to be in that, just to be in that situation. I'm constantly seeing moms getting discharged with their newborns. It's like, how come my baby has to be here all because we waited so long to birth him? So it was a little bit of like self guilt. Maybe I should have advocated on myself a little bit more. Maybe I should have said this and that. Maybe I should have just had a C-section. None of those things were on the table. So I didn't know to ask. And I think about a woman who doesn't have that medical background or family members. They wouldn't know to ask those things. They're just entrusting the doctor to handle and to make sure that you and baby are both alive and well. Definitely, I just feel like a lot of the nurses and doctors kind of dropped the ball at some of the ways that they handle us. I don't know if it was a race thing, but I will say that the insurance that I was on at that time made doctors talk to me a little bit differently. I remember they told me that Arian, he was like really nervous, and when I was feeding him, he kept like, is they feel like they're falling, so their hands kind of shake. And I had a pediatrician come in and ask me and Arthur, had we been on drugs, because the signs that Arian was showing was one of a baby that was addicted to something. And I was just like, what? Like, why would you ask me that? Why, you're the doctor, why wouldn't you just check and see before you even ask me that? Because you're gonna do it anyway, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I just definitely felt like it was a lot of disrespect from the aftercare of having the baby. How did your delivery experience affect you postpartum? I actually went into postpartum depression. And so when we got home, everything seemed to be working fine. He was good, I was good. But then it was like this dark cloud that came over me, and everything kind of like set in. And I started to process what was happening. Some moms know this and some don't. When you breastfeed, your emotions are connected to your supply. And so because I was so stressed out, I was so anxious and worried, my milk wasn't coming in fast enough. And then on the flip side, I started beating myself up because I'm like, wow, I couldn't even bring my child into this world properly. Now I can't even feed him properly because I can't even produce, enough milk for him. And I started getting into this whole like, my body is inadequate and it's not doing what it needs to do for this baby that I've created. And so I know a lot of moms talk about postpartum depression and they automatically assume that it's connected to, I want to end my life or I want to do harm to somebody. But no, it's also just a depression. You feel like you have let your baby down in some way, or your body has betrayed you in some way. It's almost like a resentfulness that you feel amongst yourself. And I know that I experienced that. I'm not sure if you all did as well.
With me, I would say if I did experience postpartum depression because it would be undiagnosed, I feel like it maybe have been a mild form in comparison to the women that I have interacted with. If I had to say that I did anything, it would be maybe almost establishing an unhealthy attachment or focus on the baby. I forgot about my partner altogether, and I became like over analytical of what it was that he was doing with the baby. Like I wanted everything to be a certain way because here it was, I created this birth plan, and like Chelsea said, I couldn't even get my kid into this, this world well enough. Someone had to cut me to get him out, and then I'm infected, and then we're in the hospital for this long period of time. So the least I can do is make sure now that he's home, he's receiving, around the clock care, the best of care, all of my attention, and I'm nursing. But I forgot that my boyfriend at the time, now husband, was his parent as well. And I think that did a number on our relationship for a great bit of time, because I think a lot of us don't realize that, yes, the transition is happening, to the mom, but your partner is also watching your body change, dealing with the emotions that may come to that. And I think for me, like I didn't allow the baby to have bottles for a good little bit. So all Robert could do was change the baby or, wipe the baby down or swaddle the baby. And now he sees us having like this deep, intimate, connection with me nursing him. And if I could do anything over again, it would be taking the time to explain to him, it's me dealing with the emotion of not being able to get him here. And I may be, processing that by having this attachment with him and being so analytical of how it is that you're choosing to parent. Later on down the line, I would say just my body. The C-section scar, I don't think a lot of people discuss that. It's really, really hard to get your body to respond, because when they cut you, a lot of your abs and your nerve endings and things like that don't necessarily go back. And then you have some people that are telling you, that's the way you're going to look for a while. And I was an athlete in high school, so I had like, this image in my head of how I thought I was going to be able to snap back, and to this day, some days I look at that scar and I'm just like, what is it? I need something to happen. And it's a constant reminder. So I think if I could share anything, just remembering that post means after. So as long as you have, even I miscarried as well, your miscarriage, your child, you are always in a state of postpartum. So just because that baby makes it to the age of 1 doesn't mean that at 3, I'm not going to look at my body and say, it hasn't responded back, and then go into a place of being overly analytical of myself as well.
So I think I experienced a bit of postpartum depression as well. So I was in labor. My whole process with Eli was about 31 hours. It was, the way he came was really abrupt. He didn't respond to the stress test the way they wanted him to one day. So they came in and said, hey, you're going to have the baby today. And I'm like, okay, this is what I'm here for. So let's do it. They induced me. I had to get on something called magnesium, which is a substance that it kind of relaxes my body in a way that it doesn't allow me to get a fever while the whole labor process is going on, so that I wouldn't have a stroke. So being on magnesium, you can't walk, you can barely talk to people, like you're literally out of it the entire time. After I actually gave birth to Eli, they put him on me for a few seconds. I was able to see him, and they had to rush him down to the NICU. So I couldn't see Eli until later the next day. So I went a whole day without seeing my child while still being under this magnesium. There with that, sitting there, not being helpless essentially. I can't do anything. I can't talk. I can't walk. I can't go down and see my newborn baby who was born at 3 pounds and 14 and a half ounces. Like, he needs his mother there, and I couldn't be there for him when he was born, or soon after he was born. So it was there were some dark days. Like Chelsea said, seeing your baby in the NICU is not a pleasant experience. Having to go there 3, 4, 5 times a day. Thankfully, the NICU here, they were amazing. I will say they were outstanding. We had 23-hour access. But walking in, I remember he had some jaundice when he was born, and he was under this blue ray light situation. And he had these little aviator shades on. They were so cute. But when I saw him under that light and hooked up to all those wires, I just broke down, because I'm like, I could not carry my child long enough, and he's under this machine, and he looks distressed, and I'm not able to do anything, and I just felt so much guilt. I felt like it was my fault that he was there. So I had some really dark days with the NICU. I cried a lot. It was hard for me to get a hold of the whole pumping, because I couldn't nurse him like I wanted to within that golden hour. They say the skin to skin that you're supposed to have when the baby's born. We didn't get to experience all of that. And I heard that, a lot of friends and family and articles that you read, it tells you like that's the moment when your milk is supposed to start producing and coming in strong. And I'm like, it's not going to do that because I didn't have that moment. So it was stressful. So I was able to work with a lactation consultant and a nurse, and they did help me with the whole pumping process. And the milk that I pumped, I felt like this is my milk that I have to give to my child who needs me in the NICU, and I'm not there 24 hours a day to supply him with food. So this is the least I can do. Like, I have to be able to produce milk to give to him. So I was able to get that process rolling, and eventually I was able to start nursing Eli, and things went well with the whole nursing thing. But Eli started getting bigger and older, and my milk started having to keep up with him, and it wasn't. So I've had a lot of back and forth with the whole nursing and pumping and supply situation. I went from having a freezer full of milk to now my son is eating more ounces than I could keep up with. So I was down about that. I remember around Christmas time, I was pumping like an ounce or two per session, if that. And I'm like, I cannot feed my child with this. So we had to supplement with formula for the first time. And that I took that really hard. I'm like, I'm supposed to be the one to feed my child, not formula. Like, I want to be able to produce milk for him to eat. I don't want to put him on formula. But having conversations with my husband and my cousin and my friends, they're like, it's okay. Like, as long as your son eats, that's all that matters. And once I got out of my head, I was able to get things back on track. That's the bit of post post traumatic stress disorder that I felt with with my son. Just the whole NICU process, um, the whole nursing and pumping process, and I'm just now starting to kind of see the light after
time, but
all of that. So,
have you guys considered going to therapy?
I go, I go. And for me, Chelsea knows, and a lot of people know, my mom and I have a very ebb and flow type relationship. My great grandmother raised me until I was in like the 5th grade. And then when I moved my mom, it wasn't always the best. I love her to death, but like Chelsea said, and my mom has admitted, that she didn't give me the best version of being a mom. So, and having my son, I didn't consider what work I should have done before I brought him into this world. And then so in speaking to my therapist, and I have a sorority sister that I call twin, I randomly had an epiphany. I am able to heal from the hurt of my childhood trauma in parenting my son, and it forces me to do the work that a lot of us probably push to the side. Those skeletons that we put into the closet, a lot of bad habits we may have, being quick at the mouth or short temper, or not granting grace. I am allowed to practice those things in parenting Robert. And although we haven't, like Kendra, it's like 50-50. It's like, yeah, we want to have more kids, but we don't know what that's going to look like or if that's going to look like it. But we have a name for her. If she ever does come and the Lord blesses us with her, I think we will be even better parents, because even my husband's childhood traumas, we are processing and working through that every single day with the guidance of, a counselor or a therapist. So having children is therapy. If you're not ready to deal with your inner self or the real version of you, buckle down and get ready, especially if you plan on breaking generational curses that may, be underlying or spotlighted in your family.
So I actually, I thought about going to therapy. I actually had reached out to a therapist here. So I live in Missouri. Um, not a lot of Black therapists, not a lot of therapists of color. And I honestly can't say that I could go to a therapist who does not look like me or have the same experiences as me in terms of society. Um, and this one person here, she was stretched thin. Okay. I had actually considered going to therapy between the miscarriage and conceiving Eli because, like I said, that was a really dark time for me. And I needed someone else to talk to outside of my husband. Like, my husband is in school for counseling psychology. That's his thing. However, my husband is not my therapist. He's not my counselor. He's my husband. And there are just certain things I'm like, I can unload it on you and you hear me day in and day out, but I need somebody else outside of you. So I consider going back to therapy or going to therapy whenever we move from here, which is in a couple of months, thank God. But it is something that I see in the near future. I just haven't been able to go to therapy as of yet.
And I think even if, because some people are still, we see like have that stigma with therapy. I know all three of us have all been very open and willing to go, but I know that some people that are watching may be like, that therapy word. I'm not into that. And that's fine if you can find an outlet that you can express how you feel, and it helps you process your emotions so that you are working towards a better you, then you can utilize that, whatever that looks like, whether it's meditating, praying, some people music or writing, running, therapy, as long as it's therapeutic, then it's therapy. So like my husband, he exercises, and he says like running helps him release stress, and also playing a video game.
Yeah,
that's an excuse that they say.
No, because after the baby, you look over there, you like, you and your useless nipples. Why are you on the video game? And it wasn't until the therapist pointed out to me, that's probably how he is processing and thinking through. But then it allowed me to realize, like you said, it's therapeutic. So let me just shut up and let this man do his work so he can help me.
And I think too, because I remember having this conversation with his best friend, and we were talking about like postpartum depression, and I think my son was like 6 months or something, and they had a baby which was a year older than, or our godson is a year older than my son, and he was like, y'all always talk about how it made you feel, but how do you think it made us feel watching you go through that? And I was like I didn't even consider how my husband felt seeing his wife go through all these emotions. And I think that that's something else that, is a great tool to discuss whatever way that you do realize that you're kind of like unlayering everything. Is like, I didn't even consider how it may look like or feel to see somebody watch the person they love kind of battle all these things internally. So we definitely had a lot of those talks, and sometimes we can laugh or look back on it now. I'm grateful that we've overcome, and we're in this good position now. And I feel like for both of you all, you both have overcome so much, and the work has been done and is continuously being done to better yourselves. Like, your kids are gonna get the best versions of you and continue to, because you're doing the work. And I truly applaud that. Like, a lot of women couldn't sit here and share their story and still be good moms to their kids, because they will still be, battling things that they're going through, and even their childhood traumas, all of those things. So I really applaud you guys for still loving and nurturing and caring. And I don't think that women, we get a lot of kudos or accolades for that. People always say when the mom has done something crazy, and they're like, I can't understand how she did that to her child, because they don't have that outlet. They don't have that therapy, or they don't have a person who's willing to listen without judgment, so that they can, help process those thoughts. When I get anxious, I get angry. I get really, and anger can turn into other things. So I do need someone to kind of reel me back in and help me say, okay, where's this stemming from? How are we going to fix it? Everybody processes their anxiety and depression differently. So I really just say, awesome job to you guys for catching it and then fixing it. What advice, as we conclude, what advice would you give to a woman listening to this, kind of experiencing some of the things that we have shared or talked about? Like, where's the silver lining or encouragement and advice that you would like to share? Your mommy wisdom.
I would say you're probably never going to stop trying to chase and get back to the person that you were before you had that baby, before you lost that baby. You're never going to get that version of yourself back, and that's because you're not supposed to. The better version of yourself is on the other side of whatever test that you're going through to get your testimony. And a lot of the time you're not even dealing with or going through whatever you're going through for you. It is so that you can help somebody else. I think so many times, like Chelsea started out saying, we keep these stories to ourselves. We keep these, the valleys to ourselves, and we have a culture where we only want to share the peaks. And it may not be on, a public platform like this, or, like a group me, if you have a collective group of women, but you should always be seeking opportunities to share, because if God brought you to it, he brought you through it, and it would be selfish to keep that to yourself. And children, Like, that's my greatest accomplishment. Like, Ken, you're in grad school, I was in grad school, Chelsea, we're degreed out, we're business owners, we are, entrepreneurs, we're wives. But when I think about my greatest accomplishment in this world, for me, it was carrying and bringing that child into this world and protecting his well-being and his future. Like, to me, like, you can't tell me anything. Me momming, that's something I know I do well, even if I'm in the corner crying because he's been up all night or in the hospital laying these people out. Like, you can't tell me anything about momming. It's made me a better woman. It's made my husband a better man, and just, it's levels to it, but it's worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the advice that I would give is to number one, get your sleep now. That is the number one thing. But seriously, be open to change. We all have these plans going in. All three of us had birth plans.
Mm-hmm.
All three of us, our birth plans went out the window, and it was what it was.
Yeah.
The goal was to get you and your baby here safely, and that's what happened with all three of us. So that is my second piece of advice, is to be open to things changing and being okay with that. And the last thing I would say is, being a mother has, like Taquay said, has been the most rewarding thing I've ever experienced. God has truly blessed us. He's blessed our family. And despite all the trauma that me and my husband went through to have a child, I wouldn't have it any other way. I feel like God put us in those situations to show how graceful and merciful He is, and how He can and be with you throughout the entire process. You may feel like He's not there. You may feel like He's not listening. You may feel like He wants you to go through all of this, but in turn, He does not. He puts His strongest warriors through. He puts them on the battlefield. Seriously. So I'm thankful and I'm grateful that God pushed us through, that He got my son here safe and sound, that I'm here healthy and safe and sound. And like I said, just being open to things changing.
My
Know that
advice
God, I
would
don't know
be
what
to lean
everyone's
on your
facing,
village.
but know
I'm a woman, so my family's from the islands, and sometimes we could be really prideful people. And I always felt like if I have kids, I'm taking care of them. Nobody else needs to take care of them. They're my responsibility. And if I have to be honest, I think that's because I felt, or I feel like I don't ever want someone to, one, take credit for raising my child, or two, the pride in me wants to take ownership of however my child behaves. Like, I did that. And I kind of had to learn that you have to step away from that a little bit. Your children are going to be exposed to everything eventually, no matter how much you shield them, because they will be adults. And so as long as there are people in your life that you trust, they may not parent exactly how you do, but if they parent in a way that's respectful to you and how you parent, then, and you trust your child around them, there's nothing wrong with that. Just because, no one will love them as much as you, but there are people who love them and want to be around them and experience them too. So don't always just kind of hold on to that for just you. And I would just also say, give yourself grace as a mother. The kitchen is not going to be cleaned every day. The laundry's not going to be put up every night. You're not going to always have all the answers, but that's okay, because nobody does. And also, you can lean on other people for advice, but pick and choose what you want to take from that advice. People are like, oh, that's old school. We don't do that anymore. Some of that old school stuff really do work. And then some new school stuff does. So you balance out whatever advice and tips you get, and you tailor it to how you want to parent your child and what will work out best for you. So take this time to see our blessings and the people that made us moms. So